Good afternoon. On behalf of Nasser and the Ara Deskiji Museum, I'd like to welcome you to today's event. It's the 17th event of 2017, and today we're going to have Boris Adjemian. He's also going to be speaking at several other venues this week. He's going to be speaking at UCLA on Thursday, at North Seront in Pasadena on Wednesday, at the Glendale Public Library on Friday, and I think a few other occasions. So we're taking advantage of him being here. Also, on October 22nd, we're going to have an event with Helen Evans from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, speaking about the Armenian exhibits. And in December, we're going to have a major conference at UCLA about the 300th anniversary of the Mechitaris Order at San Lazaro. So those are some of the upcoming events. Dr. Boris Adjemian was born in Marseille, like his parents and his grandmother. However, if you want to go further back, his family's roots are from the Izmit area, including Aslanbek, which I can't find on the map, but it's apparently a 3 hours walk from Izmit, Bardazak and Geyfye, and also from Sivri Hisar. The Nubar Library in Paris was established in 1928 by Boris Nubar, the son of the Egyptian Prime Minister, and it has a long history of, pretty important people that have held that post as director. The first one was Aram Andonian, who has his fame from the Andonian papers that Taner Akam has been talking about lately, and he was a director from 1928 to 1951. And then Raymond Kevorkian, who did the Armenian genocide, the complete history. He was the director from 1986 to 2012. And since 2013, Dr. Boris Adjemian is the director. 11 from the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales and from the University of Naples, L'Oriental. And he has one major publication so far. It's about the band Negus, the Armenians of Ethiopia, 19th and 20th centuries. And that was published in 2013. Of his talks this week, 2 are going to be about the Paris Library and 2 are going to be about the Ethiopian community. He's also written several articles on Ethiopia because it was after all, the subject of his PhD. So there's 4 right there on various aspects of Ethiopia. And he also has some articles about genocide and also Jerusalem. And he's partnered with Raymond Kevorkian, Makial Nishanyan, and others. Without further delay, I'd like to invite Dr. Boris Adjemian to the podium.
Good evening. Hello. Thank you for this introduction. So, as you can see, I became red during the introduction, especially when I saw my picture on the same slide than the portraits of Aram Andonian and Raymond Kevorkian, and as I said to Rupen a few days ago, I really don't deserve to be on the same slide, and but because he was asking me about the different directors of the library all along throughout the 20th century, and I confirmed him that only Andonian and Kevorkian really deserve to be remembered now as a director of these venerable institutions for the work they did inside and for the role they played in the historiography of the Armenian genocide. Of course, Andonian, you know about him, and of course you know also about Raymond, in very different ways, because Andonian was not a historian, he was a journalist, and Raymond is not a journalist, he's a real historian. Of course, they have different roles, but I mean, their contribution to the historiography of the Armenian genocide also is very illustrative of the place, of the role of this library, the Nubar library, in the historiography of the genocide and in the memory of the genocide. So I will start with a few information about the history of the library. Sorry, I'm trying to adjust the window. It's not so good, so like this, maybe, yes, it's better, yes. So, and I will put it in English. Yeah. So the library was founded in 1928 by Boris Nubar. Boris Nubar, as you all know, was the first president of the AGBU, and also the former president of the Armenian National Delegation since 1912. After AGBU had been founded in Egypt, in Cairo in 1906, Boris Nubar moved to Paris during the First World War, and in relation with his activities regarding the Armenian question on a diplomatic ground. And that's why just after the war, at the end of the war in 1918, AGBU Central Board moved also to Paris. So the headquarters, the executive direction of the AGBU remained in Cairo for a few years. From Cairo were organized the orphanages and the schools that were founded in the Near East after the war by the AGBU, but the headquarters, the central board, moved to Paris. And in 1922, a small group of Armenian entrepreneurs, they built the building, the building of 11 Square Albany in Paris 16th district, near the Trocadero, not far from the Tour Eiffel. And here you have, a few pictures of the library inside. And the library was opened 6 years later in 1928. And it was called the Armenian Library, but it was renamed the Nubar Library after Boris Nubar's death in 1930, 2 years after the opening of the library itself. So the first director of the library, although he didn't have at the time officially the title of a director, but he was basically the first director of the library. He is the one who organized the library. He's the one who did all the conception of the library. Is Aram Andonian, a former author and journalist of Istanbul, arrested on the 24th of April in 1915 with other Ottoman Armenian leaders and intellectuals, of course, and one of those who survived miraculously to the deportation. So, as I was saying, he holds a specific place in the historiography of the Armenian genocide, since he wrote some of the first texts on these issues, like memoirs, Ein Sevorerun, Aksori Jampunvra, but also one of the first attempts of a historical account of the genocide with his book Mezvojire, based on the memoirs of the former Ottoman official Naim Bey. And it is really Andonian who gave its primary character, its personality to the Nubar Library. So what was the aim of this library at the beginning? According to Aram Andonian himself, we don't know that much about the history of the library, because still it has to be written by someone. I don't know who will write it, perhaps me, I don't know, if it's a matter of time. And according to Aram Andonian himself, the aim of the library was to contribute to Armenian and Oriental studies, but also to be a place of scholarship, but also to be a place where Armenian intellectuals living in exile and French intellectuals could meet regularly. And finally, it was also conceived as a place where should be gathered all the archival documents that could sustain and legitimate Armenian political claims. But of course the aim of this library changed, evolved with the years, and it became a center aiming to gathering and preserving the heritage of the Ottoman Armenians, that is to say, to this part of the Armenian world which has been destroyed by the genocide. And the library became an Armenian national heritage for the French Armenian community. It was one of the main cultural institutions in the French Armenian community, since there was the Nubar library, there was the journal, the newspaper, the daily newspaper Harach, and also there was the bookshop founded by Hrant Samuelian, also in Paris, who sadly is closed now because the children of Hrant Samuelian, Armen and Alice, passed away. So these were the pillars of the cultural and intellectual pillars of the cultural life of the French Armenian community in the 20th century, and only the Nubar library is left now, since the journal Harach doesn't exist anymore. Of course, fortunately, there is another journal, Nord Harach, who exists now, and since the Librairie Orientale Samuelian closed its doors. So the character of the library evolved, I said, I would say, in several directions, and one of the main points to stress is that it became more and more a place for academic research, especially after the 1980s, and then I'm coming back to the years when the library was run by Raymond Kevorkian, the historian, when he became the new director after 1986. A place for research and a crossroads for researchers. So who are the researchers in this library? There are ordinary people who are interested by the history of their family, who come to try to find information about their family. There are students of every level, a lot of PhD candidates. You know that the Armenian studies, I mean, of course, there are plenty of specialists in Armenian studies, but we have to admit also that it is a small domain, and so the number of PhD candidates is not illimited, but there are, I can say, I'm working in the library for 4 years now. I probably have seen more than 100 PhD candidates coming to the library, which is modest, of course, as a number, but in the meantime, for Armenian studies, I think it is quite significant. And this PhD candidates, also these professional researchers, professors of university, they come from not only from France, as it was in the past, but from many countries, people from Great Britain, Germany, Italy, a lot of people from Lebanon, Turkey, more and more from Turkey, a lot of people from the United States, Canada, South America, Armenia, of course, not that much. We'd like to increase the number of people coming from Armenia also, and even people from Australia. So the public of the library became more and more international. And I have to add also that not only professional researchers are coming to the library, but also journalists, filmmakers, artists who are looking for specific information or regarding Armenia and the history of the Armenian people, or also who are looking for pictures, for archive materials that they could use in their productions. So, the library is now a crucial site for Ottoman Armenian and diaspora heritage, since, of course, the Nubar Library is not the only one in the diaspora, is not the only center of this kind in the diaspora. There are the Mokhitarist library in Venedig, in Vienna, and also the library of the Patriarch Karan, the Patriarch in the Armenian Patriarch in Patriarchate, in Jerusalem. The difference is that all these ecclesiastical institutions are not always easily open to visitors and to researchers for different reasons, and for this makes also a singularity of the Nubar Library, that it is open to anyone. We are not asking the ID of people coming here and there. We are just asking in which way we can help according to the topic of their research. So, the library, the Nubar Library, it has to be stressed that it is not only a library. Why it is not only a library? Because it is not only a place where books are kept. So I will say a few words now about the contents of the collections of the library. So an important part of the documentation came from Istanbul, Boris. Books which were given by rich Armenian collectioners, and which formed the basis of the bibliographical collection of the Nubar Library in the 1920s and in the 1930s. So we presently have more than 43,000 printed books. A lot of editions from the 19th century, coming from Constantinople, Smyrna, and also Venice. And several hundreds of manuscripts, and an important collection of newspapers, about 1,500 titles of newspapers, with 2/3 of Armenian newspapers, about 1,086 Armenian series of newspapers. Armenian Ottoman press were wealthy, very rich regarding the Ottoman Armenian press, printed in Boris. For example, titles such as Jamanak, Verchinur, Norgyang, Verazenund, Arevelk, Byzantion, Mamul, and the like. Most of these newspapers are kept, the collection are complete, which is very important to underline, these newspapers provide a wealth of documentation, of information for the social and cultural history of the Ottoman Armenians and of the Ottoman society at large. That's why they are more and more used by scholars who are studying not only the Armenian society but the Ottoman history. Some of the newspapers are very rare. For example, we put on the website only one for the time being. The website is only 1 year old. Before we had no website, so it's a progress. You have an access to the list of all the Armenian periodicals here, and you also have access for the time being to a complete series of the journal La Renaissance, who was newspapers created by Armenians in Istanbul just after the First World War, but this journal was written in French. So the journal is very interesting because it is published between 1918 and 1920, during almost 2 years, the period when there were the occupation of Istanbul by the Allied forces, British and French, and also the period of the trials of the Young Turks leaders, which were organized in Istanbul. And so there are many reports of these trials which were going on at the time in the journal La Renaissance. And the fact that the journal in French, of course, is interesting for many scholars who can't use Armenian language. So the journal is really useful and required by scholars. But the collection we have is very damaged, very old, and so we digitized the microfilm of the journal, and it is entirely accessible on the website now. As far as I know, it is the only collection of this very rare journal that is complete. I know that there is a collection of this journal, Renaissance, in Vienna, in the Mechitaris Library, but when I asked the librarian there, he was not able to tell me that if their collection was complete or not. Ours is complete. So it is interesting to note that the library, when regarding the collection of newspapers, it gives a good idea of the character of the physiognomy of the library. It is really a diaspora institution who kept a lot of materials coming from the Ottoman Empire and also coming from the diaspora, more than from Armenia. For example, we have a lot of journals coming from Paris, Cairo, Beirut, New York, Alexandria, Boston, Halep, Marseille, Tehran, Athens, Buenos Aires, Bucharest, Sofia, Yerevan, and of course there are also journals printed in Tiflis, in Georgia, and in Yerevan, but generally we can consider that 3/4 of the collection of newspapers was printed in the diaspora. Turkey, current Turkey included. There are many materials in Hayadar Turkeren in the collection of the library. It means journals which were written with Armenian alphabet, but in Turkish Ottoman language. For example, Mecmai Havadis, which was published by Hofseb Vartanyan in the middle of the 19th century, and there are many other examples that I can't quote here. And also some very rare copies of journals like Zil Daroni or Amanos, which were handwritten at the time and stenciled in a very little number of copies. Zil Daroni was published in Alexandria in 1931. There was Amanos published in Dortiol in Gilicia in 1920-1921, Yevailen. So I was saying that the library is not only a library, because there was a reason behind this statement. It is not only a library, an ordinary library, I would say, because it also preserves a lot of archive materials, and the archives are really a crucial part, a major part of the Nubar library's resource. So in the archive, you have several collections. These are not complete here. It's only the main parts of the archive. Sorry, I will increase a bit the size. You have the Andonian collection. So these are the materials which were gathered by Aram Andonian himself during the time he was at the head of the library between 1928 and 1951. Aram Andonian, who survived the Armenian genocide, spent the rest of his life to collect, to gather evidences of the genocide. And so he wrote himself thousands of pages, and also he gathered pages which were written by other hands than his, and about what happened in 1915-1916, and especially victims or survivors' testimonies. And this is very important. I will come back to this important point later if I have time. because this collection of survivor testimonies is of course unique, since it is an archive collection, not a printed book collection, but also it is very important now in the current development of the historiography of the genocide, because there is a recent interest for this kind of materials, and the work of Raymond Kevorkian, published in 2006, if I'm not mistaken, is massively based on this collection of victims, survivors' testimonies that were gathered decades before by his predecessor, Aram Andonian. So the second important part of the archive are the archives of the Patriarchate of Istanbul. The library holds a large number of archives from Istanbul, because these archives were sent in 1922, just before the arrival of the Kemalists in Istanbul. The archives from the Patriarchate were sent to Manchester in England, where there was a wealthy community of Armenian merchants, and from there they were sent to Marseille, where they were brought to Marseille by Grigoris Balakian, who was entitled to create a diocese in Marseille at the time. And finally, they went back to Paris, where they remained. This archive of the Istanbul Patriarchate remained in Paris, in the Nubar library. And ultimately, in 1938, one part of this archive, the part pertaining to the years of the war, were sent to Jerusalem, because at the time the former Patriarch of Constantinople, Patriarch Zaven, who was in exile in Baghdad, he wanted to write about his life, his husher, his souvenir, and so he asked that the materials pertaining to the years of his patriarchate would be brought closer to him, so that he could use them. So that's why they remain in the Armenian Patriarchate of Jerusalem, where they are still today. We only have at the Nubar Library microfilms of this second part of the archives. But the first part of the archive is still at the library, and it is an important collection of documents, of private papers of several patriarchs, Armenian, for example, also Törtaksutun correspondences from the Patriarchate with the different provinces of the Ottoman Empire, and for example also the census, which was realized in 1913-1914 by the Armenian Patriarchate. So this census has a crucial importance, because it is in this statistic that it was established by the Armenian Patriarchate that the number of the Armenians living in the Ottoman Empire was about 1.9 million in 1914, taking into consideration that this census was not exhaustive, because there was missing the region, the area of Van, which was depending on Adjemian, and also we are missing the Catholic Armenians and Protestant Armenians who were not depending on the Armenian Patriarchate of Istanbul. So if you add these missing parts of the Armenians, you outreach the number of 2 million easily, which is 2 times the official statistic given by the Ottoman authorities at the time, who said that there was about 1.1 million Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. So we started to digitize, and we put online some samples of this documentation. So here you can see, of course, because it is too small. Sorry. Yes. So bon, you can yourself visit the website. It will be more efficient, I'm sure. And sorry, yeah. So it is not an individual census. People are not registered one by one in the census. People are counted by localities. The census was realized concretely by the prelacies, the priests, the bishops in the provinces, and they were just sending to Constantinople in this village how many Armenian houses are there, how many people left the country during the recent massacres in 1895, how many chapels and churches we have, how many schools. This kind of information you can find in the census. Okay. Alors, the fourth part of the archive is made of the archives of the Armenian National Delegation. So, you all know about it, and the role of the Armenian National Delegation was politic. It was founded in 1912. This was one of the two Armenian National Delegations, because of course after the war and the independence of Armenia, there was a second Armenian National Delegation, and the two of them were in a kind of rivalry during the peace conference in 1919-1920, mainly in Paris and around Paris. And so we kept at the Nubar Library some elements of this archive. Some other were sent to Armenia in the 1970s, I believe, and they are now preserved by the Armenian National Archives in Yerevan. So, and finally, on this, to finish on this archive, there is the AGBU Archives. So it is not complete because the AGBU Archives is divided in many chapters. There are local archives in Bulgaria, in Egypt, and other countries, of course, in Argentina, in France. But these are the archives of the Central Board for the years between 1906, the foundation of the organization, until 1940. Because in 1940, when the Germans occupied France, the Central Board of the AGBU moved to New York. That's why for the years after 1940, the archives are now in New York. Before 1940, it is with us in Paris. And the third part is made by the archives of, not of the Central Board, but of the Executive Committee, which remained in Egypt after World War I. And these archives are very interesting because it is all the life of the orphanages and the schools founded after the war and the genocide. And these archives are still in Cairo, and they are preserved by AGBU Cairo. I think we can consider that the photo collection is part of the archives. In the photo collection, I will be brief, we have personalities collection, portraits, thousands of portraits, very old portraits, sometimes made by the Abdullah brothers, very famous photographs from the 19th century Ottoman Empire. You know, of course, about the role of the Armenian in the development of photography, in the Middle East. So we have a lot of productions from very famous photographers from Palestine, from Egypt. For example, in Palestine, Garabedian, in Legejian, and this collection is divided in personalities, portraits, and in localities. So if you look at the, at this map in the website, you are able to see you are able to figure out what kind of photographs do we have. So this map shows all the towns for which we have a certain collection of photographs. All the towns which are written in red, it means that the photographs are already online. So for example, if you want to look at, Jerusalem is not online, but if you want to look at Aleppo, you can click here, and you have about, for Aleppo we are quite rich, it's about 200 and a bit more photographs. So, sorry. Mainly, again, photographs. These photographs are pertaining to the life of the activity of the AGBU after the genocide. So the majority of the photographs are providing information about the life of the survivors, about the life of the orphans, about the life of the new communities formed and founded in the new diaspora after the war. So it is very useful for a social history of the Armenian people in the 20th century, also to complete the history of the genocide by studying the post-genocide societies which emerged in the Middle East and in the rest of the diaspora, because we also have photographs which were made in the United States, in South America, in France, in Greece, a lot of photographs from Greece, in Bulgaria and the like. So, voilà. So it's about, the collection is not that huge, but compared, for example, to the collection constituted by Ruth Thomas and her colleagues in Watertown, the SAVE project, which is about 40,000 photos, I think. Ours is about 10,000 pictures. So it is not nothing. It's not the same level, but also the kind of the pictures is different. Recently I was speaking with an archivist from the SAVE project, Mrs. Susan Adams, who came to the library, and she had a look on our photograph, and she agreed with me that it is not the same kind of photograph that we can find in the two institutions now. So besides this role of preservation and conservation of the documentation, I want to stress that the library has several different roles. Yeah. And what is important to me is to underline that the library has a role in creating and sharing knowledge about the Armenian world and Armenian history. And in this perspective, I want to tell you just a bit about the publications of the library. So the library had publications from the 1990s under with the efforts of Raymond Kevorkian, my predecessor, sorry. And Raymond created several journals. He published many books in the library. For example, this book in 3 languages, Armenian, French, and English, about the history of the AGBU in 2 volumes, and several books also about the genocide here in a journal which was called at the time Revue d'Histoire Arménienne Contemporaine. Thematic issues. There was one on the Lebanon, there was one on the Dr. Torkomian from Istanbul, there was one on the Armenians in Azerbaijan, and on Gilidia, on Mardin in 1915, and several others issues. Also, he created several less important reviews, like Revue Arménienne des Questions Contemporaines, the pink one. I don't like the color of the cover. And finally, in 2013, we created a new journal. It is very different, this one, because it is biannual, bilingual, French-English, and it is an academic journal, peer-reviewed. It means that it is based on an editorial board, and that every article is reviewed 2 times by anonymous reviewers who make corrections, suggestions to the authors, and sometimes who decide to reject the submitted articles to the review. And we published nine issues of this journal, and all of them are double edited, first on paper and also on the internet with this website, the website of Études Arméniennes Contemporaines, which you can read in English and in French. And on this website you have an access to every single article which was published in the journal in the past years, freely accessible in according to the system of open access. And it is important, I think, to underline that it is the only, as far as I know, it is the only journal dedicated to the Armenian studies which is really edited online, electronically, and which is in open access. So I was talking about creating and sharing knowledge. Sharing knowledge also, the library had an important activity in organizing exhibitions and conferences. And one of the most important exhibitions was the last one about the Armenian genocide, organized in 2015 in the City Hall of Paris. It was called Armenian 1915. It was in collaboration with the Institute of the Genocide in Yerevan. And but 3/4 of the documentation displayed in this exhibition came from the Nubar library, and the director of the commissaire, the director, the organizer of the exhibition was Raymond Kevorkian himself. So we contributed to this exhibition, and it was an important exhibition, probably the most important exhibition on the Armenian genocide ever organized in Europe. And that's why we decided after the ending of the exhibition to give it a second life on the internet, and we rewrote everything, and so everything with the text, with the documents is accessible. We tried to rewrite everything in a very accessible way, wishing to provide a useful tool both to students and to teachers. You know that now the genocide issue is integrated to the curriculum in France. Every teenager reads about the Armenian genocide when he is about 14 years old, when he's studying the World War I. So it is important that the library, which is considered as a kind of unique resource center of this kind in France, can provide this kind of support of tools to the public, to other teachers, but also to colleagues and to journalists and all the kind of people who might be interested by these issues. Because the library, it is true, developed a kind of expertise on the question of the genocide, decades after decades, and so we try now to use this expertise in order to accompany the development of the consciousness of the Armenian genocide in France. So there are a lot of photographs that you can enlarge, of course, and there are also video productions like this one with, for example, displaying a map of the genocide, the routes of the deportation, the camps, the places of where occurred the massacres, the camps of the Euphrates Valley here. This map was created by our friend Harut Bezjan from Beirut, and this map was displayed for the first time in the exhibition I was talking about in the City Hall of Paris. And so very simple, but yeah, with a didactic ambition. Yeah, now we have an access to detailed points of the map, detailed information about the several phases of the genocide. The first phase with the massacres in eastern Anatolia, the second phase with the creation of the camps in the valley of Euphrates, and the like. So I'm not displaying everything. There is also this diaporama about the convoys of deportees. So We'll just get the sound. Yeah, and I was saying I shall finish. I present. Probably I was long enough. I was saying that we also collaborated to conferences. We co-organized the conference in Jerusalem 3 years ago. We are now editing the proceedings of the conference with the support of the AGBU and of the Gulbenkian Foundation. We are also organizing a series of conferences in Paris in the AGBU Cultural Center, Alec Manoukian. And also we are participating to the training of the French teachers on the history of the Armenian genocide, because you know that now all these genocides in France, the Tutsi genocide, the Jewish genocide, the Armenian genocide are studied at school, and the Mémorial de la Shoah in Paris is organizing training sessions for French teachers, and we are participating to these training sessions. So, I think I've been long enough, and of course I will have other things to say, but I'm sure you perhaps will have questions, so I will answer with pleasure if I can.
Comment, Dr. Boris Adjemian. This is an incredible, fantastic, important story that you shared with us today. Since 1928, 89 years, almost 100 years of documentation of the survivors of the genocide and the detailed journeys of their deportation, and all the other fantastic things, the conferences, the publications, and so on, which is a research center for scholars. The one question is, during these 89 years of the Nubar AGBU Paris Library, who has been supporting the finances, the expenses of all this work, which must be thousands and thousands of dollars, you know, and French francs and so on?
Well, the only organization who regularly sustains the development of the library is the AGBU. There is no other financement for the library. But you know, the fact that this library turned into a research center with so many achievements is not only a question of money. It is primarily a question of dedication of the people who are working in it. People like Raymond or Armenian are incredible people. So they did a great job. They could have just sit in the place and have do nothing with the material they have. No, they wanted to do something. So this is not only a matter of money. Of course, money is crucial. We need money to develop the activities of the library, to enhance the programs of digitization, for example, to enhance this kind of program of website and everything. But the intellectual resource, you can't get it only by putting money on the table. These are two different things.
The second question is this genocidal persecution of the Armenians that has been going on for 2,500 years already seems not to be stopping. When you look at Turkey, Erdogan, when you look at Azerbaijan, Aliyev, the tendency is to continue if they can, any day, any time. The question is, in your opinion, not as a politician, not as a philosopher, not as a person, wonder if you have some ideas how to prevent such a thing in the future happening to our nation in the diaspora and in Armenia, because as you know, Armenia is a remnant of the Soviet system, and it's suffering from the Soviet system today in not having, although independent 20 plus years, is having difficulty in finding itself with the influence, the Soviet influence. So how do you think we should deal with our future so that we don't have similar problems, but have something more positive to write about, our contributions to the betterment of world society as an Armenian nation in the world?
Sir, you are talking about very global issues, and of course I'm not able to reply to all these issues. What I can say modestly as a historian, and not even a specialist of the genocide, which I'm not, that what we can do, the least we can do, is to provide information, to share information in an accessible way, and to accompany the growth of the consciousness of the societies, of the politicians regarding the past events like the Armenian genocide, and to do our job as historians. So it has nothing to do with politics, actually. So I cannot answer to your question entirely, but I would say that the role of this kind of institutions, library, is history, culture, education, and I could repeat it.
In a few seconds, if I may make a suggestion, just briefly, that, no? Okay.
To continue on the theme of disseminating information, what is the plans over here?
I'm sorry.
What are your plans for continuing to digitize the archival materials? Do you have a timetable? Do you have the finances to do that? And is that proceeding?
Thank you. So now we are reconnecting with the financial issue, which is important, of course. I'm not denying this. We drew a project, and we prepared a project, a global project of digitization of not of whole library, the whole library, because I think first it is not doable, second it is not suitable for several reasons that I could explain, technologically, also because of the spirit of the library. It has to remain a place for a crossroads for researchers, not only a virtual space. Everything cannot be virtualized, of course. But in the meantime, we have to make a huge effort on digitization. For this, we need to have professional means, not only craft-handed digitization as we are doing now. And so for this, of course, we need more money. But everything has been planned and defined, and we know exactly in which direction we should pursue the effort, which kind of documentation has to be digitized prioritarily, from the newspapers collection, from the archive collection, not from the books, because the printed books, it's another thing. Of course, you can find them in Yerevan, you can find them in other places. Archives are unique. Our collection of newspapers sometimes are unique. So these are the priorities we have to define. Of course, there are also the photographs. We connected to this project of digitization. We also have an important project to develop a broader activity regarding Armenian studies and the knowledge about Ottoman Armenian society by creating a second space of documentation, a second center of documentation, but not in the diaspora, this time in Armenia. And the idea would be to connect these two existing research and educational center, one in the diaspora, one in Yerevan, and to create a kind of, to contribute to a kind of dialogue between the cultural and intellectual dialogue between the diaspora and Armenia, and also to value the Ottoman Armenian heritage, which is worthy to be known, but in the meantime which is less known in Armenia.
On that note, do you have efforts for outreach for additional materials to add to the library? Family collections, things that say maybe I might have from my grandparents or great-grandparents and don't know quite how to preserve them. Do you have an avenue for obtaining those materials and in that way preserving and archiving those as well? Are you expanding the library?
If I understand well, you asking me if the library still is growing. Huh? Yeah, it is still growing by receiving this kind of gifts by families, by people, sometimes also by institutions. And the problem is that we cannot enlarge the library itself. So to have a library in Paris, of course, there is the space issue. Also, although we have the chance to have this place from 1922, because it was built by Armenians, by an Armenian architect, by the way. So it is a historic place that we have to maintain. But and also this place has to be valued. There was a renovation. I have to indicate this. There was a renovation very recently, thanks to the efforts of AGBU France, who renovated entirely the library. So this is very important. But in the meantime, we can't extend the library indefinitely, and that's why I think a collaboration with other institutions, for example, a new institution, a new center in Armenia would be a chance to expand the library itself, to expand its capacities. Yeah.
You said there is a difference between the pictures that you have, the photography that you have, and the photography of the project SAVE. Were you talking about numbers only, or?
No, I was, well, myself, I paid a visit to the project SAVE documentation, so I cannot talk about it generally, only a few samples that I looked after. I have seen that, for example, if I was looking for the Jerusalem photographs in the project SAVE, they were much more recent than the photograph that we had. The photographs that we have are dated from the 1920s, the early 1920s, even before. Even the origins of the photography in Jerusalem, because once again the first photographers in Jerusalem were Armenians. So that's why we have this kind of very historical material in the library. In the Jerusalem file of the project SAVE, for example, there was a lot of materials too, but pertaining to another period after Second World War. So this kind of difference we can trace. And when I was speaking to Susan Adams, the archivist of the project SAVE, we have looked to the Jerusalem file, to the Aleppo file, and she agreed with me that yes, it was not the same kind of pictures, but the content of our collection of pictures is strongly related to the activity of the AGBU at the time, since the AGBU was one of the main organizations trying to sustain the life of the survivors of the genocide. It is natural that the documentation now is directly linked to this history.
Okay. You mentioned about the newspapers. Is it primarily Istanbul, and do you have any newspapers from Lebanon in your archives there? And how about the Haraj? Is it complete you have there?
We have a lot of newspapers printed in Lebanon, a lot. And all the list of newspapers, Hayerinov, printed in Armenian in Lebanon, is accessible on the catalog of the website. Just let me show you, because usually people don't find it. So we have things to improve on the website, but it is here. Periodicals, you have periodical list. Okay, you click here, you have a PDF file. It is very basic, very simple, but you have an access to roughly what we have in terms of Armenian newspapers, with the Khompagir, the name of the editor, and the date, the place of publication. So we have a lot of publication from the Near East and from Lebanon. And the other question was about
Haraj. Is it complete, or do you have...
Haraj is not complete, and also we had a problem of space. That's why one part, a minor part, but a part of the newspaper collection was sent outside of the library, I think in the 1990s. It is in a kind of depot that we are paying every year because space is lacking, and our collection of Haraj is there. I know it is not complete. It is nearly complete up to the years 1995, I think. After the 15 last years, I think it is not complete. But there is a complete collection of Haraj, because Arpik Misakian gave her complete collection of Haraj. I think initially she even proposed it to the library, but at the time the library didn't have the space to welcome it. So finally she did it. She gave it to the library of the Institut National des Langues Orientales in Alco, where there is an Armenian department and a wealthy library. We are wealthier, by the way, but they have an entire collection of Haraj. And now there is a French-Armenian association based in Marseille, the Association Aram, who digitized, I think entirely now, the whole collection of Arpik Misakian, of the Haraj newspaper. So it is available on their website.
Okay. And one of the maps you put, you said in there that the cities that were in red,
yeah.
Now I noticed that Malatya was not in red. Any idea when it is coming up? Malatya, but let me see. There is no Malatya on the map, so it means down from. Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah. So it means that at least we have at least one photograph on Malatya. I don't know how many. We have a file on Malatya. I don't think that the Malatya file has already been digitized. I can tell you that many other files have been digitized. For example, Constantinople and the like had been digitized. Jerusalem, Cairo has been digitized, but it is still not on the website because we are working with very small means in terms of personal. I mean, we are two in the library, so it is not easy to do everything. Since we also have to publish a journal, since we also have to help with the organization of events, conferences and the like, and since I'm here and I'm not there, you understand that our capacity is limited also. But it is doable. It is doable. Also, it happened in the past, in the recent past, that some people asked us about photographs of a precise town, and instead of sending him the photographs, because we don't like to send the photographs like this, we put it directly on the website to make them accessible to everyone. So perhaps we can work like this also for Malatya in the near future. There is no technical problem for this.
That between the passing of Aram Andonian until coming of Raymond Kevorkian, who was running the library? Who was in charge?
Between them?
Yeah. Because there's a gap in your direction when Rupen was showing.
No, it is not a gap. No, it is. Yeah, there were two other librarians. Mr. Kardashian was the last one. He was from Egypt. I think he ran the library from the early 1970s to 1985. And Mr. Salmaslian was the second one after Aramandonian, so from 1952. And he stayed approximately, 18, 20 years in the library. they were not historians. Andonian was not a historian, but he had the mind of a historian. So he did really a great job. Since at the time no historian was working on this, except for example Arnold Toynbee. But I mean, his contribution to the history of the genocide is huge, is great. And it's not only the telegrams of Naim Bey. This is a very, very small part of his contribution. Very anecdotic part even of his contribution. The main body of his contribution is the collection of victims' testimonies, survivors' testimonies, because it helped, for example, Raymond, to understand from the interior part the process of the genocide, to understand what he called, he was the first one to call it the second phase of the genocide, what happened in Dezor, what happened in Raqqa, what happened in these places, Rasulain and after. Because this is the continuation of the work of Andonian. Without Andonian, we would not have the same understanding of the genocide even today. Farah?
I'm curious, you mentioned during your lecture and right now about this Turkish Bey and the telegrams, and I'm curious, what happened? How those telegrams originals were lost? Thank you.
I think I am as curious as you, it is the first question that I asked Raymond when I entered the library, and the answer was, do you think I was not curious to know it? And so we don't know. There are hypotheses. There are specialists of this kind of hypotheses. I'm not one of them, so you should ask them. But some say that perhaps it was lost after the trial of Solomon Terilian, because Andonian was sent to Berlin with documents to provide useful information to the lawyers who were defending Solomon Terilian. But recently I had discussions with some historians, some specialists, who told me that no, it is not possible. But really, we don't know. I don't know. Sorry, I don't know. And I'm in the place, but I don't know. It's a mystery to me. It's not the only mystery. There are several mysteries in this library, which is a kind of cavern of Ali Baba, as we say in French. And so the making of the library itself is quite mysterious.
Going back to the issue of directors, for the record, I think they should be listed whether they were productive or not.
For the?
Whether they were productive or not, the directors of the library, they should be listed. I didn't see their names over there.
Yeah.
Whether they were productive or not, any director who served at the library should be listed.
Yes. You know, yeah, okay. I was asked by Rupen actually who were all the directors, and I am guilty because I said only you have to mention those ones, not me, but I said even to Rupen, don't mention me on the slide, please. He said you are too modest, but truly the two directors who really did a job in the library in terms of historiography, in terms of knowledge, are these two. Of course, we have to be respectful of all the directors. I would say also that Andonian was not officially the director, even though he stayed 30 years in the library, even though he organized everything. He didn't have the title of the director. There was another one who was the director. He was a kind of préposé, kind of secretary. But he was the true director of the library. But I understand your objection, and yes, you're right. You're right.
Do you have any cooperative activity or cooperation with the archives in Jerusalem, or do you expect to have in the future now that Claude Boutafian has taken over? What's your impression of that?
Claude is taking over what exactly?
Like the archives in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
There's a they're the second best, I think, in outside of Yerevan. Do they? My impression is that you are probably a lot more advanced in monitoring those and archiving them than they probably are. So do you think they will be amenable to work with them, or do you think they will ask for your help?
Okay. Claude is working in Jerusalem now on a project of rehabilitation of the former Armenian Museum of the Patriarchate. So it is not linked to the question of the archives, which is another question. The question of the archive in Jerusalem is very sensitive. For every archive in Jerusalem, not only for the Armenian, for every religious community, the question of archive is sensitive because every religious community wants to keep its archives and jealously doesn't want to give an access to these archives because they fear that it might be used against them. So this is directly linked to the specific political context of Jerusalem in Israel today. And against this we can't do nothing. So the archive of the Patriarchate, Armenian Patriarchate, are very wealthy. It is not only the archive of the genocide. There is, for example, the archive of the Ottoman period, it is very wealthy. The archive of the genocide, it is not, as you understood, these are not the archive of the Jerusalem Patriarchate. They were brought here accidentally, incidentally, and the problem is that except a few researchers who were authorized to have an access to these archives, the archives are not open to the public on a regular basis. And this, in the past, in a recent past, until a recent past, was a matter of a political will. The heads of the Patriarchate didn't want to open access to the archives. Now it is different. The mood have changed in a positive way, but in the meantime, they are lacking competence to organize the archive. There are no archivists, real archivists. There are no historians too in the Patriarchate. Although there is now the will to give an access to the archive, still it is how can I say? Still it could be better. We, of course, I went many times to Jerusalem and we had discussions with the director of the archive, and even there is not a reading room for the archive, so everything is complicated so far. So I hope, they were promising that for the centennial of the genocide they would open this archive to the people, to any researcher. I observed that they didn't. So I don't think they don't want. I think they had other priorities and they were not in capacity to open it as they should have done. I hope they will, because I know that some researchers were able to look in the archive. Myself, I was authorized 1 or 2 times to have an access to different archives of this period, but it was, so today you have an access, tomorrow you don't have an access. So for a historian, it is not really an open access. You need an open access. The archives of the Nubar library are open to anyone. But in the Armenian world, it is not so common that the archives are open to anyone.
Let's give a big hand to Dr. Adjemian. Thank you for this informative evening. We do have a small reception, so I would like everyone to come downstairs so we can close here. Because of safety issues, it's getting dark, so we need to go downstairs. Thank you, Dr. Adjemian. Merci.